In this video, we're going to look at what is usually shown on P&IDs. So everything on P&IDs could be classified under one of these four categories. You can either have pipes and other flow conduits. So these are flow carriers, essentially. You could have equipment, you could have instruments, and finally you can have signals, which essentially allow instruments to communicate with each other and for the control system to be implemented through these signals that you show on the P&ID. Okay, let's begin. So with pipes and other conduits, what does that mean? So that means that you could have pipes, so you show pipelines in your P&IDs. You could also have tubing, you could have hoses, you could have ducting, you could have channels as well. So what is the difference between pipes and tubing? That is something that I'll speak about at the end of the video, so you could stick around till the very end. Hoses are commonly used for low pressure liquid applications. And you could have ducting, which is commonly used in gas venting systems. So if you have a reactor that has an exhaust, and you could use a flexible duct, for instance, for that exhaust. Channels are used commonly for containing large bodies of water. And this is an image of a channel that has water flowing through it. When it comes to fittings on P&IDs, you don't show any fittings except the following. You show T's, you could show reducers, you show flanges, caps, plugs, and blind flanges. So let's see an example. Don't worry about the notation, just let's look at the visuals themselves. So in this example, what you have is you have four process flanges. This is a process flange, this is a process flange, this is one, and this is one as well. And we're going to look at how to read them through understanding and looking at P&ID legends, because through the legends you should be able to see what each of these symbols mean. However, this is very common to find, the process flange looking like this. Then you have here three reducers. Over here you have three T's. You can see this might be a line that delivers, for instance, some kind of utility, maybe water, maybe air, and you could see that there's distribution of that, so you could see different splits. Over here you have three splits, and at the end of this line, over here you have a cap. So with regards to fittings, you could tell from this line what kind of fittings are involved, but there are no other fittings that are shown on this line. Doesn't mean that no other fittings exist. First note is that these T's, this could be a normal T, such as the one that you could see here, or it could also be a saddle T, and a saddle T is different in a way where with these normal T's, you have two pipes that come on each end. With a saddle T, on the other hand, you have a straight pipe. However, you drill a hole into the pipe and then you clamp on this saddle, and the saddle over here has an O-ring to create a seal so nothing leaks out. It essentially functions exactly as a T, but the way you install it is different. Now, note that on this P&ID, there could be 10 elbows in this line, or there could be 0 elbows. We just don't know. Also, this line could be 5 feet or it could be 15 feet. We also don't know. So this is important to note that we don't know what other fittings exist, and we also don't know the lengths of these lines. How long are they? We just don't know. Now, the second category would be equipment. So for equipment, the normal process equipment that are typically shown on P&IDs, well, you could have pumps, you could have compressors, you could have heat exchangers, you could have reactors, you could have also tanks and vessels, which are normally used for storing material. Now, you might wonder, what are the equipment that are not usually shown? And these equipment would be the ones that purely serve a mechanical function and is not essential to process operation. And so that could be excluded from P&IDs. And you might wonder, how do you classify a piece of equipment as not essential to process operation? So that means essentially it does not participate in process flow or process control. Examples could be gearboxes for mixers. So if you have an agitator that has a gearbox onto it, you don't necessarily have to include the details of the gearboxes in your process P&ID, because this could be found in mechanical drawings or vendor equipment manuals, or maybe you could write about it in your operation or maintenance manuals as operators perform maintenance on these gearboxes. Also, you could exclude small built-in lubrication systems for any equipment that you have. A note here is that if these auxiliary systems are significant or operate independently, such as, let's say, a large lubrication system for compressors, then they're typically included in dedicated P&ID sheets or dedicated auxiliary P&ID sheets that are usually attached to the set of P&IDs, the process P&IDs, but at the very end. Or they could be also included in like utility P&IDs, or if it is a large lubrication system, sometimes you'd find vendors giving you their own P&ID system for that lubrication system, and all you have to do is just attach it to your main process P&IDs, and that would be considered a package-specific P&ID from a vendor. Now, the third category is instruments. So with instruments, they are the physical devices that monitor and control your process. They form a critical part of the control and safety system. They allow you to have real-time visibility and allow you to intervene in your process. So key functions of instruments are they measure process variables for you, whether it's level, temperature, flow, pressure, composition, and etc. Over here, this is an image of a flow transmitter. Also, instruments allow you to perform control actions. So instruments can open or close valves. They can turn equipment on or off or modulate outputs. So let's say if you have this control valve, depending on the control system, you could modulate the flow based on a flow reading, for instance. Instruments also give you real-time values, whether you read it locally, as for instance in this flow transmitter, you could read the flow locally from that device, or you could have it wired up to a HMI, for instance, in a separate room. Also, instruments could trigger alarms and interlocks when safety or operating limits are exceeded. This is an example of an alarm instrument. And this could be configured such that when another instrument in the process hits a certain value, then the alarm system begins and that notifies operators to do something. Also, instruments could communicate with each other and can communicate with the control system by sending signals to each other. And also, there are some instruments, especially smart instruments, that help you with the diagnostics when maintenance. So it provides some kind of status and fault detection. And so this makes it easier for you to perform maintenance on these instruments because the instruments themselves tell you when they need to be maintained. Finally, the last category that's usually shown on P&IDs are signals. And signals, they provide the means for the instruments to communicate with each other through the control system. If there are two separate instruments and if there's a signal between them, then this signal should be depicted on the P&ID. Let's see an example here. So you have a pipe that is carrying some kind of fluid and it's flowing past a control valve, and there's a flow transmitter that's measuring the flow rate of the pipe. Now, to control flow using a control loop, you have the flow transmitter FT101 over here, measures the flow, and then you have a flow indicator control, which compares the measured value with the set point and outputs a control signal to the flow control valve 101. Then flow controller 101 modulates the flow based on that signal that it received. So this is an example of one control loop that you can have to control flow rate in your piping, for instance. Hello everyone, I'm excited to share with you that I'm working on a brand new course series all about piping and instrumentation diagrams, P&IDs. So it comes in two parts. Part 1, you're going to learn how to read and understand P&IDs. So this is perfect for interpreting established diagrams with ease. Part 2, you're going to learn how to develop P&IDs from scratch. So for a limited time, for as long as this video is live, you can sign up below and you'll get part 1 completely free, plus an exclusive discount for part 2. So don't miss on this chance if you're interested, and I hope to see you again. Now let's get back to the discussion about the pipes and the other conduits when I asked initially what's the difference between pipes and tubes. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is because sometimes they're used synonymously, and sometimes there's a lot of confusion between them. So pipes and tubes, you have to know that usually pipes are available in large diameters, so you could have up to and greater than 24 inches in diameters. With tubes, they're typically smaller in diameter, so we're talking about fractions of an inch to a few inches. With wall thicknesses, usually pipes are standardized. So over here in North America, let's say if you're buying a plastic pipe, you buy, let's say, 2-inch plastic pipe, and you have to inform the supplier what schedule you are looking for. So schedule 40 or schedule 80. And what that impacts is the thickness of the wall of the pipe. So if you want pipe that's stronger, then let's say you go with schedule 80 and not schedule 40. So that means you have thicker walls. However, with tubes, you don't have that standardized method. You have to specify directly what the wall thickness of the tube you're looking to buy. Now, there are common wall thicknesses that are manufactured and available, and this is something the manufacturer can help you with. And so when you purchase tubes, you'd have to specify directly the wall thickness. The measurement bases for both of them are different. So in North America, when you're buying pipe, you're usually following the nominal pipe size. So if I say I want 2-inch PVC schedule 40, that means that 2 inches would be the approximate ID. It wouldn't be exact, it would be approximate. However, the outer diameter of the pipe would be a lot bigger. It might be around 2.5 inches. And this is fixed because of the standard that we're following. On the other hand, when you say, let's say you want a 1/2-inch tube, that means that you're specifying the outer diameter of the tube. And so the inner diameter of the tube will be smaller than 1/2 inch. When it comes to pressure capability, both pipes and tubes are capable of maintaining or handling high pressure situations. However, tubes are often preferred, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Machining tolerances, usually pipes have looser machining tolerances, and what that impacts is just the OD and the ID of a pipe. However, with tubes, they follow different standards, and therefore the tolerance for the OD and ID variability is a lot tighter. When it comes to finish and cleanliness, usually pipes are used with industrial finishes unless otherwise specified. You could see it installed in many industries. And when it comes to tubes, however, they're often preferred for high purity applications, and they can come polished and ready for sanitary use. Let's look at these examples together, and let's just try to predict whether pipes would be more suitable or tubing would be more suitable. So you can pause the video and look at these 4 examples, and then we're going to solve it together. So let's look at the first example, high volume water or gas transport. So if you have high volume, I assume you're also having a high flow rate. So in that case, it makes more sense to have larger diameters. So in this case, I'd say a pipe. If you have high pressure, small hydraulic lines, so the combination of high pressure and small lines, which means smaller diameters, would make me lean towards using tubing. If you're looking for clean, sterile service for pharma or food industry, then tubing would be more appropriate. Now, finally, if you're distributing steam in your plant, then piping might be the more appropriate option, because I assume you have larger lines and I assume you need steam for heat exchangers, and so there isn't necessarily a particular steam grade or quality for the water that you're trying to maintain by having a particular finish on the pipes. Now, I said that tubes are better for high pressure applications than pipes, and I just want to qualify that statement. So usually, because tubes have tighter dimensional tolerances, what that means is that you have less risk of leaks and more repeatable and reliable seals. So your commissioning team will be happy. Also, because compression fittings outperform threaded pipe joints, and I've kind of hinted on that. So threads are easier to leak. It's harder to create a seal with threaded joints, especially at high pressure. Now, on the other hand, pipe that is welded is a very good option for high pressure and temperatures. In fact, welded joints are sometimes required by code. However, welding requires skilled labor and certification, and welded joints are not field reworkable. So if you require changes, you'd have to cut the piece, take it to your shop, and then re-weld it. So if your application is not governed by a piping code and the conduit size, so let's say the pipe size or the tube size is small enough to allow for you to use tubing material, then compression fittings offer faster installation and easier modification. Finally, you have finer size increments when it comes to tubing. Tubing jumps are finer, so you could even find tubes as small as like 1/16 of an inch. And then you could go to 1/8 of an inch and 3/16 of an inch. And as you can see, the tube size jumps are very fine. However, when you look at pipes, their jumps are more coarse. So like you can have 1/2 inch, and then the next one up would be 3/4 of an inch, then 1 inch, then you could find 1.5, then 2, and then you keep going with more coarser jumps. Over here, I just wanted to show you the difference between a 1/2 inch T that is using NPT fittings. So this essentially connects pipes, and a 1/2 inch T that connects tubing, for instance. Let's look at 316. This is McMaster-Carr website. It could show you the pricing for both and also some parameters. So you see the 1/2 inch T could handle 2,800 psi at 350 Fahrenheit. You could see the tubing over here, 1/2 inch tubing, could handle 5,000 psi at 72 Fahrenheit. So you could see the tubing over here could handle a lot more pressure, but also the temperature that it's showing is a lot less. So we'd have to derate it to be able to compare them as oranges to oranges. Also, we know that 1/2 inch tubing fitting here refers to 1/2 inch OD, while the 1/2 inch and pipe size over here doesn't refer to 1/2 inch OD of the pipe. The OD of the pipe could be larger than 1/2 inch. The 1/2 inch would be closer to its ID, but not necessary. You have to look at the NPS charts, National Pipe Size tables, to see what the actual ID and OD is. Anyways, this was meant to be a quick introduction on the 4 categories that you would see on P&IDs. So without further ado, see you in the next video.